How do I configure PyCharm to run Py.Test tests? I want to start writing unit tests for my Python code, and the Py.Test framework sounds like a better bet than Python's bundled unitest. So I added a tests directory to my project, and added test_sample.py to it. Now I want to configure PyCharm to run all the tests in my tests directory. PyCharm allegedly supports Py.Test in its test runner. You're supposed to be able to create a run/debug configuration to run your tests, and PyCharm allegedly has a create configuration dialog box specifically for Py.Test. But that's the complete extent of their documentation on the subject, and I can't find this alleged dialog box anywhere. If I right-click the directory in the project tool window, I'm supposed to see a create menu item, but the only menu item starting with create is create run configuration. Okay, maybe the documentation is just wrong, and create run configuration does sound promising. Unfortunately, the only two items in its submenu are unitests in C:\mypath and doctests in C:\mypath, neither of which applies. I'm using neither unitest nor doctest. There is no menu item for Py.Test. If I open my test_sample.py and right-click in the editor window, I do get the promised create menu items. There's create unitests in test_sa, followed by run unitests in test_sa, and debug unitests in test_sa. So again, it's all specific to the unitest framework, nothing for Py.Test. If I do try the menu items that say unitest, I get a dialog box with options for name, type, tests, group box with folder, and pattern, and script, and class, and function, etc. This sounds exactly like what's documented as the dialog to add a configuration for Python unit test, and not like the name, and test to run, and keywords, options that are supposed to show up in the configuration for Py.Test dialog. There's nothing inside the dialog to switch which test framework I'm adding. I'm using PyCharm 1.5.2 on Windows with Python 3.1.3 and PyTest 2.0.3. I can successfully run Py.Test on my tests from the command line, so it's not something simple like PyTest not being installed properly. How do I configure PyCharm to run my Py.Test tests?
I think you need to use the run/debug configuration item on the toolbar. Click it and edit configurations, or alternatively use the menu item run, edit configurations. In the defaults section in the left pane there is a Py.Test item which I think is what you want. I also found that the manual didn't match up to the UI for this. Hope I've understood the problem correctly and that helps.
Please go to File Settings, Tools, Python, Integrated Tools, and change the default test runner to Py.Test. Then you'll get the Py.Test option to create tests instead of the unitest one.
PyCharm 2017.3. Preference, Tools, Python Integrated Tools, choose Py.Test as default test runner. If you use Django, Preference, Languages and Frameworks, Django, set tick on, do not use Django test runner. Clear all previously existing test configurations from Run with Debug configuration, otherwise tests will be run with those older configurations. To set some default additional arguments, update Py.Test default configuration. Run with debug configuration, defaults, Python tests, Py.Test, additional arguments.
Here is how I made it work with Pytest 3.7.2 installed via pip, and PyCharm's 2017.3. Go to Edit Configurations. Add a new run config and select Py.Test. In the run config details you need to set target equals Python and the unnamed field below to tests. It looks like this is the name of your test folder. Not too sure tough. I also recommend the S argument so that if you debug your tests, the console will behave properly. Without the argument, PyTest captures the output and makes the debug console buggy. My test folder looks like that. This is just below the root of my project m_project/test, that my fooper_test.py file. No imports needed. Run it with the normal run command.
If you want to support the channel, please consider liking and subscribing.